The ceasefire in northern Syria seems to be holding, at least as of now, but how long will it last?
James Carafano is the vice president at the Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks so much for being here.
Good to be with you.
So President Trump's taken credit for this ceasefire, but critics say that he actually created this crisis when he pulled U.S. troops from northern Syria. How do you see it?
Well, I actually reject both those comments. I don't think he created the crisis, and I don't really think he solved very much. First of all, the U.S. did not greenlight the Turkish incursion. I think that's actually pretty clear if you look at the timeline. The Turks have wanted to do this for a really long time. If we made that possible, it's because the U.S. did such a good job leading the fight on getting rid of the caliphate that basically all the parties in Syria that were squabbling over the civil war, they just went back to what they were doing, which was squabbling over Syria and the civil war. The Turks always wanted this buffer zone, and they were going to take it, and they took it. And the U.S. had really we could not leave U.S. forces on the ground in the middle of that. You know, on the other hand, I think the ceasefire is great, but I think that would have evolved anyway. I think it's good that the YPG did not fight for that land. I think the Turks are going to be satisfied with the border strip that they've taken. I just had one of my analysts come back from Turkey and talk to a number of senior officials, and this is what Turkey has always wanted. They wanted to secure the border the uncontrolled border between Turkey and Syria. And I think this really satisfies their security concerns.
And James, you're mentioning what a great job the U.S. did there, but President Trump admitted yesterday during the press conference that thousands of lives were lost. Some critics are saying that this is a power vacuum. That's the phrase we keep hearing, and it's what has led Russia to enter the country. Now they're patrolling the border. Is this a win for President Putin? It doesn't seem like a win for the U.S.
Well, it's certainly not a win for Putin. I mean, that criticism is about as vapid as you could possibly get. Syria has always been in the Russian orbit. The Russians have never left Syria. And the reason Assad is still in power is because of Russia. But Russia's got really no place to go in Syria. Any direction they go in, they're gonna bump into Turkey, they're gonna bump into Israel, or they're gonna bump into Iran. So they've got no place to go there. This is kind of going back to the status quo. I tell people, look, why could a couple of hundred U.S. forces jump into the middle of Syria and fight the caliphate? And the reason for that was nobody had an interest in seeing the caliphate, and they were happy to let the Americans come in and help lead a campaign to get rid of him. Having said that, everybody just goes back to the Civil War. If anybody had the capacity to win the Civil War and end this thing once and for all and take advantage of that, they would have done it 10 years ago. So we're really just going back to the status quo of where we were before the U.S. entered the conflict and the caliphate erupted.
I do want to talk about ISIS because even the president has admitted that some ISIS fighters are out of jail now. Is there concern that this has done irreparable damage?
You know, I don't think so. I mean, so a couple of facts. One is the vast number of the ISIS detainees that were held by the YPG were not in the area that Turkey has gone into. So they're still in YPG custody. There are leakers. There are always leakers. There are actually thousands of foreign fighters, ISIS people running around loose in Iraq and Syria. Anyway, so this essentially has been an ongoing, persistent problem. It's not really a new problem that we've got ISIS fighters running around after the caliphate. And we've warned about that. We've warned that some of these guys will do terrorism, and girls will do terrorism in the region. Some of them will try to sneak out, go back to their home countries or other countries. They might just disappear, or they might try to do acts of terrorism there. So in a sense, that's a continuation of an ongoing problem that we've already been building a structure to deal with. And in terms of continuing to fight ISIS in the region, the U.S. still has a footprint in the region, and I think the U.S. will still be able to effectively continue that fight. And even the YPG and the SDF, which is the political umbrella, has publicly stated they're going to continue to work with the U.S. on the anti-ISIS fight. And that's not because they like us. Nobody likes us there. But nobody wants to see the caliphate come back. Not the Russians, not the Iranians, not the Syrians, not the YPG, and not the Turks. So some may fight them more harder than others, but nobody's going to allow them to sit down and run up another flag and declare another caliphate.
You know, James, we're all seeing the photos and videos emerging of Kurds suffering at the hands of Turkish-backed rebels. Really, it started 2 weeks ago when we pulled troops out. Do you believe the ceasefire will stop, as the president has called it, an ethnic cleansing?
Well, I think, ceasefires are usually imperfect, especially in these situations. And this is Syria. We've had lots of ceasefire in Syria between lots of groups on lots of sides. None of them have held perfectly well. We said from the beginning the U.S. was opposed to the Turkish incursion. And I think that was the right policy to take. And the U.S. has also said that Turkey, having taken this on, Turkey has to be held accountable. So I understand the president is lifting sanctions. And I understand that was part of the incentive to agree to the ceasefire. And let's be clear, the ceasefire has dramatically helped reduce casualties and limited suffering. But Turkey has to be accountable for what they do. If they don't comply with international norms, if atrocities are committed, if they allow militias to perpetrate acts of violence and don't seek to limit them in their areas, if they allow terrorists to operate in their area and they don't seek to deal with that, Turkey has to be held accountable for that by the United States and other countries as well. And if Turkey has done human rights violations, then the people and the Turkish government should be held to account in the United States, and sanctions would be appropriate.
All right. James Carafano, thank you for being here. Appreciate your insight.
Thanks for having me.
Next on Cheddar News, a preview of the opening bell on Wall Street.
And 500 years later, a new exhibit dedicated to one of the greatest artists